Hello class. Now what we're going to do is talk about describing data. So there's four ways that we're going to talk about describing data. It's the shape, center, spread, and outliers. So the first thing is our shape. These are probably the most important thing, and you can find them really quickly. So we've got four different types of shape. The first one is called mounded and symmetrical. It's mounded in the middle, and it's symmetrical. Symmetrical means it looks the same on both sides. So we've got it's mounded in the middle, looks like a hill, and then it looks the same on both sides. So that one's mounded and symmetrical. So this is like a histogram that's mounded and symmetrical. All right, the other one that is also symmetrical, it's called uniform, and what it does is just it's kind of like a rectangle, goes up, goes flat across. There's no kind of hill shape to it. So this one is uniform. Skewed right is whenever you have a few data points that are really big, and then most of the rest of the data is smaller than that. So skewed right is going to have these few numbers that are up here. That little tail, think of the tail goes to the right. So we got those bigger numbers. That one's skewed right. And you think of it skewing the mean to the right. Whereas skewed left, we have a few small numbers, and then most of the rest of the data is bigger. So that one's skewed left. This one's skewed right. You're following the direction of your tail. So the tail here is left, tail here is right, and that's the easy way to keep track of those. Next up, we want to find the center of our data or our distribution. So the way that we find this is we think of finding a balance point for our data. So what we do is we think about where, if I put a little like triangle, where is that going to balance out like a seesaw? So it might be somewhere around in here, because if you think about, we got this number up here that's going to kind of mess things up. So you might want to put it around there somewhere. It's kind of just whatever your best guess is, that balance point that's going to help you out. But we can calculate it as well. So we're going to use the mean or the median usually to find this center. Remember, we call those measures of center. So that's how we're going to find those center points. You're going to either pick the mean or the median, whichever one looks more appropriate to be the middle or the center. Next up, we've got spread. And the question that you want to ask yourself about spread is how far away is our data from the center? Okay, so that's how spread out the data is. Sometimes it's going to be really narrow, sometimes it's going to be pretty wide, and so we just talk about it generally. And remember, those measures of center that we talked about was the range, the interquartile range, or that standard deviation, and you pick out the one that is the most appropriate for that. And then the last thing we're going to talk about are outliers. So outliers, the question that you're going to ask yourself is there any data that is really far away from the rest of the data? So we look at our two examples here. One that has an outlier is going to be this one. This little data point out here is really far away from the rest of our data. Whereas this distribution, most of the data is pretty close to the center. There's nothing that's like really far out there. So this one does not have there is no outlier here, but there is an outlier there. So that is how we talk about describing data distributions. Remember, it's the shape, the center, the spread, and the outliers. You've got to talk about all four of them in order to get full credit.